And joining us now on the debate for the full hour, Ellie Alboim, Principal with Earnscliffe Strategy Group, Alan Bonner of Alan Bonner Communications Management, Bernie Morton, Vice President, Sussex Strategy Group, Bob Penner, President and CEO at Strategic Communications, and Katie O'Malley, reporter and inside politics blogger at the CBC. Fairly interesting night last night, wouldn't you say? Fairly interesting. Let's just start with this. Ellie, you first. What did the people of Canada say last night?
Lots of people said different things last night, Steve. I guess one of the dominant themes was time for a change among progressive voters and time for continuity and stability from conservative voters.
Alan.
New ways to have influence and a vote of confidence in the status quo.
Mr. Morton, sir.
Enough is enough.
Enough of what?
Enough of this minority government, the longest serving minority government in the history of Canada, where some things got done, many things didn't get done. And the theme is change. It wasn't a change from the current government, but it was a change from who would be running Quebec, who would be the federalist alternative in Quebec, who would be the governing national party. We have a new national party. And so it's change. You know, we've seen this theme of change sweep at all three levels of government, and federally the electorate spoke loud and clear that they wanted change as well.
Bob Penner, a vote for change and status quo at the same time?
Different voters voted for different reasons, and undoubtedly there was a big vote for change, and that vote for change was saying the NDP was that change. So I think that was going on. And for a number of voters, they did want the status quo. Those are different voters. I think also what went on last night was basically saying the Liberals and the Bloc are not vehicles for change. They're not an avenue for future political choice, I think, and the NDP was the beneficiary of that.
Katie.
Yeah, I think the voters did kind of, it seems that they took Stephen Harper's ballot question very seriously, which is you either give me a majority or you do something else entirely. And some parts of the country went for the majority, others went for the something else entirely. It's actually interesting to look at where the votes did pretty much, in a lot of ways, stay the same. Look at, for example, Newfoundland, where there was Newfoundland and Labrador, where there were, I think, 2 changes, but that's maybe 3, but not a sort of sea change, sweeping change. Also, most of Atlantic Canada in general was a little bit, I think it wasn't quite as dramatic as some people were expecting. Then you hit Quebec, and it was just a tidal wave. Ontario got more blue, but was already heading blue anyway, so I'm not sure if that was in itself a major shift from 2008. In a way, it was a continuation from what went on there. So, yeah, I've got to concur that a lot of different voters said a lot of different things, which is kind of what happens in an election.
Ellie, as you watched the returns come in last night, what was the most significant thing that really stayed with you?
I don't know the answer to that, to tell you the truth. The most significant or the most interesting?
Well, this is what, election number 44 for you?
Yeah.
So you've watched 44 elections. What did you see last night that you thought, oh my God, I never thought I'd live to see that?
Actually, to tell you the truth, not very much.
Come on. You thought the NDP would win 100 seats?
Yeah, I did, actually.
Did you think that a year ago?
No, I didn't think that a year ago. But what I did think is when a wave begins, it tends to overstate and it builds. And we've got lots of precedent for that in Canadian history. When Frank McKenna won 58 seats to 0 in New Brunswick, when Premier Lougheed took out the social credit, just like that, 71 seats. These things happen. When they build, a collective decision gets formed and things move very quickly. Interestingly, in Quebec, as late as the day before Election Day, seasoned reporters and columnists were saying, this isn't going to happen. The Bloc is going to survive this and lose a few seats, and that's it. And they went down to 4 seats.
I want to ask you, Bob, because you've spent many, many years as well working on getting New Democrats elected from coast to coast to coast. Did you see 100 plus seats in Quebec? Never mind 100 plus for the NDP countrywide, but 60 plus in Quebec for the NDP?
Absolutely.
No, you did not. You're such a liar.
No, I didn't. I mean, that was the sea change. I mean, the NDP, since Jack has been there, Jack has always made his main objective, or one of his main objectives, to make the breakthrough in Quebec. We knew that to become a national party, to have a chance at national governing, you have to win in Quebec. And he's put, an enormous amount of effort from 2004 and all the elections since, trying to make the breakthrough in Quebec. Why did it happen this time and not in 2006 and 2008, 2004? Who knows? Part of it is people getting used to Jack. Part of it's Jack's French improving. Part of it is who knows what. Why did it happen this time in this way? We don't know. But it was a massive sea change. It's a massive sea change in politics. And
you know why?
No, but I want to change the metaphor with respect. I don't want to call it a wave because I've lived and worked and watched elections in 7 provinces, and I always find it hard to believe that something that was going on in Nova Scotia, well, the coattails in Harris's coattails in St. John's, Newfoundland, or Robert Chisholm had been the former leader in Nova Scotia, is somehow rolling through to what happened in Quebec. What happened in Quebec is unique to Quebec. They got fed up with the Bloc Québécois. It's been 20 years. Ça suffit. Let's try something else. And this has almost nothing to do with agrarian socialism in the prairies. I mean, even S.M. Lipset said, was mystified why it carried on in Canada, died out in America, and noted that there was not a rapprochement between agrarian socialists and urban street fighting progressives. So this is all a mystery. It's not a wave. I would say it's a rising tide or something, some other metaphor other than wave, because I think that bespeaks how we watch elections in time zones rather than how electoral behavior occurs.
Okay. Katie, what did you see last night that you said to yourself, oh my goodness, I never thought I'd see that?
Well, other than the obvious, I mean, yeah, I'll admit I never predicted the NDP winning more than 100 seats and sort of taking over in Quebec. Although, as one of my colleagues pointed out at Jack Layton's press conference earlier today, Quebecers do have a tendency to sort of fall madly and sometimes fleetingly in love with a political movement kind of out of nowhere. The example he gave was the ADQ, which of course managed to sort of show up out of nowhere, almost very close to becoming official opposition in Quebec, and then and actually there were times when it was seen that they might go into government on that election night, and then were basically the love died real quick, and they were reduced to almost no stature. I think what's going to be really interesting to see is what the NDP does in terms of holding on to this new power, or whether or not it does become that weird election of the early 2000s where the NDP briefly controlled Quebec.
It's always interesting how leaders interpret the mandate they got or what the results say. And Bernie, I want to ask you about what you think Stephen Harper last night was inferring from the fact that he got up to 167 seats.
Well, I think he was basically saying that that the majority government that he's been honored to get by the electorate is something that he's going to hold very dear to his heart, and that he's going to ensure that he's going to be working with all of the parties to put forward a mandate which is a no-surprise mandate.
Okay, but did he see this as somehow rewarding him for 5 years of good government?
I think it is 5 years of hard work, of taking a party that was once split, putting that party back together, and methodically planning the point to which he would be able to say there is a new national alternative whereby each province is represented by a conservative, and which is what we now see. And I think he must be smiling because now the demise of the Liberal Party means that they have to set the reset button and start rebuilding as the Conservatives have done for the past decade.
Ellie, if you were with Stephen Harper last night and you were trying to explain to him, here's what I think people have said about you in giving you 167 seats, how would that conversation go?
I think he got the message. I think he said that he got the message last night. I thought the speech was very conciliatory. He talked about governing in the name of everyone, which he understood to mean that the polarizing politics that he had been conducting probably hadn't gone very well. Whether you call this a wave or you call it an uprising, whatever you want to call it, the point is the progressive voters were looking for change, and they got together and said, we really don't like the way things are being conducted. And I thought the Prime Minister got the message last night. And he said, he even laid out a bit of a policy agenda. He laid out a willingness to conciliate with others and cooperate with others. We'll see. The proof will be in the pudding, obviously. We haven't seen much of it in the last 5 years. But it sounded to me like he'd gotten the message pretty clearly.
Let me see. We got that clip teed up? Stay by 1 second, Bob. Can we show the clip of Stephen Harper last night? Please, roll tape.
At the end of it all, Canadians made this critically important decision today, friends. They chose hope, unity of purpose, and a strong Canada. And because Canadians chose hope, we can now begin to come together again. As we must, as Canadians, as fellow citizens, friends and neighbors. For our part, we are intensely aware that we are and we must be the government of all Canadians, including those who did not vote for us.
Okay, Alan, he said it. Does he mean it?
Yeah, well, yes, conciliatory speech, but I give Stephen Harper more credit than to think he got some overwhelming mandate last night. I'm one of only 6 Canadians who's read his master's thesis, and it's a very scholarly work. He's smart enough to know that he didn't install a weak leader in the Liberal Party. He's smart enough to know that he didn't personally destroy the Bloc Québécois. All kinds of other things conspire, and in the same way that the voting decision is much more complex than a wave, it is an individual decision in an individual riding, the voting decision is also complex enough to not simply be a referendum on Stephen Harper, it's a referendum on 3 or 4 other candidates and parties as well.
Bob.
I think it's a bit much for him to say it's a mandate on hope. He campaigned on fear and anger. He didn't campaign for the whole country. He campaigned for his base. He wasn't interested in a broad, progressive, or any kind of message. He was interested in trying to anger his base and turning them out to the polls. That was their whole strategy. That was their whole approach to governing. And now he's going to say, I've got a mandate for hope and I've got the broad agenda. Well, let's see it. I kind of doubt it. It certainly wasn't anything reflected in his campaign. It was the exact opposite. It was a campaign that was trying to anger his base and turn them out. He started out with 37%, and they figured we only need a few more percent and a bit of an advantage in terms of our get out the vote strategy, and we'll be the government. And we'll be the government with 40%. And we'll govern with a majority with that.
Katie?
And that's what I'm afraid of. And that's what you should make a speech about if you're the new prime minister, but that's not how he campaigned.
I would actually suggest that you go back and listen to his victory speeches in both 2006 and 2008, which are word for word almost exactly the same. I know, because it was particularly, it seemed a little strange in 2008 for him to, once again set up and say, I know I have to be the government for all Canadians, not just the ones who voted for me, which he again said in 2006, and he said, I think it's safe to say that when he got back into Parliament, the first time, and when he got back into Parliament in 2008, his first step was not to try to be conciliatory and work with the other parties. I have to say, anything can happen, but at the moment, the NDP may have over 100 seats, but in a majority setting, they got no leverage. There's nothing they can do to actually hold the government to account. They can stand up in question period and ask a lot of questions, and they can raise a real ruckus outside. And this is one of the things I found really interesting watching the NDP crowd at the headquarters last night, was they were obviously completely chuffed and overjoyed by the numbers they were getting. But as it became clear that this wasn't just going to be a majority, but a comfy majority, enough of a majority that the Prime Minister can let people go on trips or occasionally maybe take time off for vacation. Well,
temper the enthusiasm a bit. Maybe.
I think that people were trying to realize exactly what that meant, because for the last, since as long as we've had minority governments, the opposition has had power if they're able to sort of work together and stand up united. And they don't, even if they all vote together now, it doesn't actually matter. So I'm going to be really curious to see what they're able to do to put forward the mandate that Jack Layton has also said this morning. He thought he's gotten.
Let me get one more comment from Bernie on this issue of whether Stephen Harper means what he says when he says, I'm going to govern on behalf of all the people, not just the ones who voted for me.
Absolutely right. It's going to be a center-right agenda with, again, no surprises. It's whatever commitments and promises he made during the course of the campaign, that's what you're going to get.
Would you say his track record over the past 5 years would lead those who didn't vote for him to think that, yes, he was governing in their interests as well?
Longest-serving minority in the history of Canada. I think that speaks loud and clear. I have to disagree with Bob. I have to say, there's no special motivation that's needed on the part of Conservative supporters. They don't need to be, feared, as you had said, into voting.
Well, they are motivated about illegal immigrants coming in from the West Coast, which is a non-issue.
They're motivated in of themselves to get out to the polls because they could feel that a majority was within their grasp. There's no more motivation that's needed than that. Well, and if you want to talk about fear, this whole hidden agenda that is Stephen Harper, if you were to part that perfect hair that he has, you would find some hidden horns somewhere, whether it's the soldiers on the streets that was from 2006, or whether it was the liberal ads, or whether these types of ads
all about fear.
It's fear
I'm not
mongering.
saying it, he said it.
Okay, stand by you two. Let me get Ellie and then Alan.
Look, there's a different reality, it seems to me. But for an extra 5% push for the NDP in Ontario, Stephen Harper got a majority. An extra 3 to 5 points, and Stephen Harper had a weak minority, and the NDP had a much stronger finish. We had a de facto coalition starting to form. It fell short. Liberals, got 18% of the vote. Bloc has virtually disappeared. They're angry. They came together in some way to say they're not happy. They're not that big a step from next time expressing that displeasure. I think he gets that, and I think he understands that.
The they meaning the 60% of people who voted against him.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, 40% is great in a 4 or 5 party race. 40% ain't great in a 2-party race.
Gotcha. Alan.
Well, I lack my fellow panelists' ability to read Stephen Harper's mind or see into his heart, but you started the round of questioning by saying, well, what would be your advice to him? I would say, look, you've engaged in the politics of incrementalism for 5 years to get closer and closer and closer to your 2 goals of a majority government and natural governing party. And I would say, look, you were lucky. You didn't have much of an opponent. You didn't need the negative ads because Michael Ignatieff was doing just fine, thank you, destroying himself by being boring and not having exciting policies and what have you. What happens if there's an exciting attachment to a new Liberal leader, an exciting attachment to Layton or to Robert Chisholm or some other new NDP leader? Do we have the charisma in this party? Do we have the technique in this party to really sustain majority government over several elections? Maybe not. That's what I'd be worried about.
Bob, I'm going to follow up with you now. Take the microscope off Stephen Harper, put it on Jack Layton. With 30% of the votes, he got over 100 seats. He had a more efficient vote last night than he's ever had, than this party's ever had in its 50-year history. And again, on this issue of interpreting or misinterpreting what the public said, how should Jack Layton be thinking about all that today?
Well, Jack got a big mandate. Jack got a mandate for change. In terms of, there was lots of choices for change. You could have gone for the Green Party, you could have gone for the Liberal Party in Quebec, you could have gone for the Bloc. People across the country voted for Jack. And somebody who's going to be the oppositional force to Stephen Harper, many, many people said it was going to be Jack. He has emerged as both in theory and in practice as the opposition leader. People will be looking to him to hold this government to account, and he is the Prime Minister in waiting, no doubt.
Katie.
How? Sorry, I have to ask, how? How do you do it if you're in a majority, an opposition in a minority government?
How you do it is you do your job well for the next 4 years.
That's not an answer.
Why
I mean,
not?
with all respect, that's not an answer. Doing your job well, like what specifically do you do? Other than asking question, I mean, can you do that in Parliament? Do you end up doing it outside of Parliament? Does that mean sort of doing the Michael Ignatieff trick and traveling across the country on a bus, trying to build your support for the next campaign? I mean, I guess that's what...
He has to do all of those things. I mean, when you have 100 new MPs, you've got to do the work in those ridings. You've got to lock them in, as the NDP has done incrementally over the last 4 elections. We get somebody elected, and they do their job, and they do their work, and then they're likely to get elected the next time. We have to do that now 3 times as many MPs as we've had before. So we have to do that work. He has to show that he is the Harper fighter in Parliament, which he will do. And he has to work for whatever compromises or changes he can make in the Harper agenda. And I agree with you, it's not going to be easy.
I just think that worked a lot, that whole scenario played out a lot more predictably when you're looking at a minority government and when the opposition has leverage.
It's a horrible thing that Harper has a majority.
Hey, I didn't say that. I'm just saying in terms of strategically.
It's going to be very difficult for the NDP
yeah.
and for everybody who has an interest in things that Harper is going to do wrong in the next 4 years. And the NDP and Jack Layton will have to show that they're able to effectively as possible, fight those things, and also demonstrate that they're a government of waiting.
You're starting to hog the mic here too much. Ellie, has Jack Layton, in fact, do you think, convinced the majority of Canadians that he is the logical alternative to Stephen Harper right now, and will be for the next, 4, 5, 6 years?
In my view, no. I don't think there was any conversion on the road to Damascus here in a 3-week period where the country embraced both him as a potential prime minister and the policy set as the policy set that the country should be governed under. I think there was a protest vote. I think there was a coalescing of around change. I think he has an opportunity, and he has a significant opportunity. I mean, part of the answer to Katie is I agree with her point, but at the end of this, he will have been prime minister for 9 years. There will be time for a change that probably will start cascading a bit at the end of 9 years.
But you're not sure he's the logical inheritor of that?
Who, Jack?
Yeah.
No, I'm not sure at all that he's the logical inheritor of that. I think we're going to get 3 new leaders. Well, not 3 new leaders. We're going to get a new Liberal leader. We're going to have a new Bloc leader, if that matters. Jack will have to perform over the next 4 years, and I think we'll see at the end of that where we're at. And it has a lot to do with how the Prime Minister does. Prime Minister, if the doubt around the table is that he can govern for everyone, if he continues to run a perpetual election campaign, and a hard-eyed election campaign, I think he's misread what's happened. And I think you'll have a problem at the end of 4 years.
Let's look into what some of the lessons in terms of campaigning are from this election campaign. Bernie, this is not going to come as news to you, but there are a lot of people who thought Stephen Harper ran an overly scripted, overly closed, no interactions with any quote-unquote real people on the campaign. He only had interactions with party supporters. You had to pass through an RCMP cordon to get into any public event, quote-unquote public, that Stephen Harper had. And he won. And he never had one of those kind of awkward moments on the campaign trail where people were protesting and got in his face or anything like that. Yeah. What's the lesson?
Well, in today's day and age where every person, every Tom, Dick, and Harry is a freelance journalist armed with a BlackBerry and a YouTube account and everything else, Murphy is alive and well in politics, and so much can go wrong. So you need to be tightly scripted. You need to be disciplined. And the Prime Minister, it will come as no surprise to anyone, is a very disciplined individual. And he insists that his campaign team is disciplined. And that trickles down to all the different campaigns and all the different candidates. Does it surprise me? If you saw the Prime Minister's press conference today, he was smiling, he was jovial, he was having a great time. He went back to the mic twice to answer more questions. I mean, this is another side of Stephen Harper that we haven't really seen, but it's a side that those who know him know is there, and I think the journalists are going to warm up to that a little bit.
So the days of 5 questions and out are over?
Well, you have to remember that one is campaigning and the other is governing. They're two very different disciplines.
Just to be clear, you know, when he's not campaigning, we get maybe one media availability every 6 months, and it's 4 questions, not 5. 2 English, 2 French, that's it, you're out. So actually 5 a day would be amazing.
So
Can we do that? Because I think we totally go for that at the press gallery.
What's the lesson you took from how Stephen Harper and the Conservatives ran their operation?
Oh, I agree, yeah. It appears to be, if you try to do anything spontaneous for the love of everything, don't hold a town hall because somebody in the back row might shout something, and then that's going to be on the evening news for the next 3 nights, and you're going to be written off as a crazy man with no support. I didn't say it was a good lesson, but I think that is the lesson that definitely came across.
Alan?
Well, I brought the secret weapon from this campaign. A lot of people think it was handheld devices, as you're talking about, and last election was supposed to be the YouTube election. This one is supposed to be the Twitter election. I found Twitter, other than my own, mind-numbingly boring. You know, that journalists were getting their hair done and they were eating a sandwich and they were hyphenating the word hamburger and this type of thing. This piece of technology here, car keys, which takes voters to the polls, is still one of the most powerful pieces of technology you have in politics. You might get people interested, you might motivate them, you might get them engaged, but you got to get them to the polls.
Well, we're with the #1 blogger in the country here, so let's go to you.
Also, not my job to get people to the polls. My job to tell them what's going on. They can get themselves to the polls.
I didn't say it was your
leave
job.
that to the campaign.
I'm talking about as political operatives using tools to win elections. I still am underwhelmed with Twitter, and we'll see what the results are.
Ellie and Bob.
Alan, then you've got to explain how all those Quebec voters who couldn't get into cars ended up voting. There are a lot of people in Ile-de-Madeleine who didn't have a single operative driving them to polls. If people want to vote, they vote. When we worked together in the Ontario election, the name wasn't even on the ballot at that time. And Ontario voters knew how to find a polling station. They knew how to figure out who to vote for. But in Quebec last night, there was no get out the vote.
Okay, but fair
operation.
enough.
People figured it out.
Is this doing it any more efficiently and effectively than a lawn sign or than a sign on a telephone pole?
I'm not arguing that.
Okay, good.
I'm not arguing that.
So I'll come back to that in a sec. But just on the Harper thing, there's an ancient adage in politics, and it's to the victor goes the spin. So, you know, Harper's campaign was great because they won, and they can say that everything they did was right. But actually, it was a poor campaign. And they got lucky because they got lucky on the splits that happened in Ontario and to some extent in BC. Really, their campaign of trying to mobilize a narrow base was not working up until just about E-7 or 6, when it just turned...
Sorry, just translate, meaning a week before election day?
Yeah, okay. Sorry to use the jargon. Okay. But, I mean, really what happened is they got great breaks on the splits, especially in Ontario and in BC, and in some other places was where the NDP vote came up, and it hurt the Liberal vote more than it hurt the Conservative vote, and the Conservatives won a lot of seats. Otherwise, they would have not have won the election.
Let's put up where the leader stood, because this may actually animate what you're talking about right here. This is top of page 2, where the leader stood. The daily Nanos, this is Nick Nanos' leadership index, and you know, obviously Harper was at the top of the chart for almost the entire campaign. You saw Jack Layton overtook him for just a little while, But then there was some pretty strong anti-latent, that orange line, the second line, some pretty strong anti-latent stuff in the dying days of the campaign, which appears to have worked because Jack's numbers dipped, Stephen Harper's numbers went up. And as we can also see from this, Michael Ignatieff was apparently never a factor when it came to leadership, nor were the other two. Bernie, you look at that, and what does that tell you?
Well, it tells me that the Prime Minister was consistent. I mean, consistency is important in campaigns.
He said it was a lackluster campaign.
Well, you know, I'm sure that Bob is disappointed in the result. I know that he's happy. I know that he's happy that Jack Layton is the leader of the official opposition. Jack Layton did a good job, but you also have to remember that the last 2 days of the campaign, they also shut Jack down to the press. They wanted to ensure that he was going to be able to ride whatever wave that he had into whatever fortunes the electorate were going to give him. As it relates to splits, we have a multi-party system. Every party benefited from some split or another, whether it was the Liberals who benefited from some splits and holding on to some of their seats, or whether it was the NDP who certainly benefited from a lot of splits as well.
Ellie.
Okay, 2 points if you indulge me. One, to Bob's point. I'm not sure when a party gets 44% in the province, you're talking about splits. I think the Conservatives racked up a very impressive popular vote total and won a lot of ridings on the basis of an increased vote and a very significant vote. But I think there's a much larger issue that you're raising, which is, does the campaign matter and does the leader's tour matter? And I think that's a real issue in the modern day campaign.
What's the answer?
My view, no. I think that it's largely a media construct. It's a place for people to go to cover what they believe to be the news. It creates events. They cover it as a news story. You could see the frustration among the press gallery all through this campaign as allegation after allegation appeared, gaffe and problem and embarrassment, and it didn't affect the standings at all.
So what does affect the standings then, if not that?
Well, there's lots of research about this. You know, people get, unfortunately, most people get most of their information about political campaigns through paid advertising. I know that that's a very disturbing thought.
Heretical.
But it's not through media. And media's impact on campaigns is very minimal over time. The debates are important. It's the only shared experience we have during an election campaign. We all watch it. Sometimes we come to a view, sometimes we don't. But again, this time in Quebec, the move started for Layton as it did for Mulroney in '84.
Katie, I want to follow up with you on that, because you and I were both at Michael Ignatieff's news conference this morning, where he resigned as the leader of the Liberal Party. And I'm not going to call her out by naming her here, but one journalist took me aside this morning and said, you know, what Ellie just said, he never got past the ads. And he said he was, you know, it almost didn't matter what he did in his campaign, because he ran a pretty good campaign. Everybody seemed to think he did pretty well. Had not a bad platform, the family pack. Nothing seemed to matter. Are we in a day and age where what you do doesn't matter all that much, but what the ads do is supreme?
I think that's definitely part of it. I mean, I wouldn't say nothing, because I think the trouble becomes when an ad campaign only works if the subsequent events as they transpire seem to back up that narrative. And remember, I mean, if you look at the original ad campaign, it sort of was trying to characterize Michael Ignatieff as being sort of haughty, not in touch with Canadians.
Just visiting.
Just visiting, but professorial. Remember the chateau in Provence, that sort of thing. And so when he does then appear, you know, someone sees this ad and they think to themselves, oh, well, that Michael Ignatieff character, so he's haughty, is he? And then they see a press conference or a clip of a press conference where he's, you know, uses a highfalutin language, or just seems to be in that one clip, seems to live up to the stereotype that was caused. I think that the combination is what does it. It was the same with Stéphane Dion, because the not a leader, which we all sort of mocked at the time when those ads first came out, because it seemed like such a ridiculous cartoon-like way to depict him. But then you had him having troubles with his caucus, and he was sort of this hapless character. And remember the great abstentions and all that stuff. So it actually did seem to back up.
It frames him.
I think that the ad sort of plants the seed, but it's the way the ensuing events transpire that means whether it wins or loses.
Politics is a profession with certain, sometimes intangible attributes that you have to have: charisma, power, connection with people, focus, facial expressions, etc. Now, if you asked 100 monkeys, does this guy named Michael Ignatieff look like a politician? They'd say no. If you sent out to central casting and said, send me some guy who's going to make a barn burner of a speech, we're going to put it in a movie, they would say, well, why has he got that face? Why is he screwing up his face like that? He simply, and I say with whatever charity I can muster, he wouldn't get a job in television. being your sidekick. He did not have the attributes that are required in modern 21st century campaigning that have been required since the 50s.
Not the natural ones, but he learned a lot on the job, right?
Yeah, yeah.
He
Went from -2 to +1. Not good enough. Now
Okay, but the Prime Minister's
Harper isn't great.
Right.
No, he isn't great. He's gone from +2 to +4 or something. He is dull and worthy and earnest and doer and bookish and scholarly and such. But I think that attributing Michael Ignatieff's failure to negative ads is giving too much credit to negative ads. Now, if I sold political ads, I'd be all in favor of saying that's what it was. The man didn't have an entrance strategy. He wasn't telegenic. He wasn't mediagenic. Period. Full stop.
Bob Penner.
I absolutely agree. I'm still waiting. I'm still waiting for somebody to put the absolute proof out there that these ads are consequential in determining votes, because I don't think they are. You don't have to see an ad to know that this guy is not a good leader. You could have missed every single ad and seen him on the debate and go, this guy is not a good leader.
I want to remind everybody right now, our whole program tomorrow night is about the Liberals. So we're not going to spend a lot of time on the fate of the former natural governing party right now, but a couple of last comments. Bernie, Katie, then Ellie.
So ads typically are about either defining your opposition or saying what you are about. And the Prime Minister's ad, or the Conservative ad campaign, as it related to Michael Ignatieff, was, again, showing these are things that if you don't know this about Michael Ignatieff, this is what you need to know about him. And then you'll recall that in the dying days of the campaign, the Prime Minister's ads were more about him looking prime ministerial, the voiceover, this is what you will get out of a Stephen Harper majority government. There's also another sort of side to the ads. There's the online ads. We are per capita the largest internet users in the world, Canadians, and there's a lot of online advertising as well.
And people watch them?
And people watch them.
And you have sort of research that shows that
lots
they
of
were
research
influential?
that shows that they're extremely influential. And for those people who are actually looking at getting out to vote, often they get their either their news or their advertising information from the internet. We didn't see a massive explosion in the voter turnout, 61%, but certainly it was
Better
enough.
than last time.
Still better than last time.
Yeah. Okay.
That's right.
Katie, then Ellie.
I actually just wanted to echo what he said about I thought there was that one sort of sweeping, epic film-like positive ad about Stephen Harper, which they used to play, and I know this because I went to most of the Stephen Harper rallies that were in Toronto, because they were in Toronto, so I figured I may as well cover them. And every single one, they all unfolded basically on exactly the same program. They were totally identical, but they would show that ad and play that voiceover, and it would sort of whip the crowd up. And I do have to wonder how much of a role that might have played in sort of sealing the deal, as it were, because it wasn't negative, and it really did sort of celebrate him as an almost epic figure, a modern founding father
Just
of
before you
Canada.
get in, Ellie, I want to ask you, because you know a little something about ads. Should it bother us that ad that you're referring to, the one with the Paul
Yes.
Henderson goal in 1972,
Yes,
and
that's
planes
the one.
flying overhead in Niagara Falls and kids playing, and a shot for shot, even to the size of the font and the type of font and the music, Tim Pawlenty, the former governor of Minnesota, a complete ripoff. Should that bother us?
Probably not. People who produce ads and do TV shows and do commentary watch a lot of shows and commentary and TV and borrow and steal. And the expression, great artists borrow and fabulous artists steal, or something like that. But I agree with Katie. That was a great ad. If you looked at the text of it, somebody should have been a better copy editor. He wanted Canada to be as free as it could be. Interesting upgrade on the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, to be as free as you can be. Now, who gets to decide how free we can be? So some of the copy was gibberish, but beautifully shot and beautifully voiced by someone who's not a great speaker, but he did as well as he could do.
Completely unoriginal, but that's another story. Ellie.
Then I guess I'll make the obvious point: if the positive ads are great, negative ads probably have an impact too. And I guess if I was in media training, I'd emphasize media performance the way Alan did.
As you should.
As I should, right?
As
Well,
a reporter, I like
there
to
is
start
no-
taking questions from reporters.
there is
Just put it on
no
record.
evidence, folks, that a disengaged electorate pays attention to politics, particularly in the off-season, that Canadians had any sense of Michael Ignatieff from any other venue other than the advertising. There is not a scintilla of evidence of that.
Which partly explains why he is where he is today.
In my view, yes.
In your view.
Well, the scintilla, though, to be fair, the scintilla is there has for 50 years been good theory about how we are influenced by what our peers say about something. So an opinion leader like Steve, or like you, would see an ad or see free media and talk it up in your circle of friends, and that's extremely influential as well.
Bob.
And the off-season only counts for so much. I mean, there is some level of like laying the groundwork and having some influence, but it really comes down to the campaign period itself, and then what goes on there. And I actually think it is the opposite. I think it's the tour. I think it's the debate. I think it's the speeches. I think it's Ignatieff talking about rising up that did him a lot more harm than any of those ads did for 2 years before.
We're going to get off the Liberals right now because we're going to do the whole program on the Liberals tomorrow night. And I don't want Wojtek Schemberg, who's producing tomorrow night's program, getting in my earpiece saying, enough, stop, we're doing this tomorrow.
Let's get on the media just for a sec.
I wasn't talking about Liberals, I was talking...
Right, no, but he was.
When Ely had dark hair covering elections 30, 40 years ago, the complaint amongst journalists...
Did you ever have dark hair back then? Yeah, I did, and it was very long. I had a big beard and bushy hair.
I mean,
I'm not sure it was 40 years ago, but okay.
The complaint among journalists was the daily Gainsburger. You're on the tour and you're fed the same old speech with one new paragraph. Boy, it's great to be here in Moose Jaw. Well, you know, what the media should do is stop covering that nonsense and cover the issues. There's no particular need, I think Ely and I might agree, there's no particular need to be covering that bus trip, and it's about time to maybe change the methodology.
That's the air war.
Are we allowed to do that?
Campaign.
Yeah.
I
was going to ask, are we allowed to do that?
I think the Constitution requires us to have at least one person on a tour bus.
The Constitution.
Well,
I am
she's being
joking.
facetious,
I am
think.
joking.
But yeah. Okay, moving on. Folks, you all know who Peter Russell is. He is a scholar of Canada's Constitution, and well, I can remember in 1979 I took a class with him at the University of Toronto, during which time he tried to impress upon me how our Constitution worked. And you know, when he spoke, I listened. And you want to talk about online and the importance of YouTube videos and that kind of thing in this campaign? He did a YouTube video, and it was stunning. I'm going to show you a little clip of it right now. Please, roll tape.
When the speaker finds you being in contempt and you just shove that off, and the people of Canada possibly reward you with a majority in Parliament, I really tremble. I'm just full of fear. I love the country. We're the fourth oldest parliamentary democracy in the world. I treasure it, but I would be afraid that our government would be in the hands of people who don't treasure it, don't respect it.
Okay, this is not a guy given to flights of fancy rhetoric. This is a very sober individual who said, well, you heard what he had to say. And Bernie, I'm going to go to you first on this. Your Prime Minister, our Prime Minister, the head of your party, has been criticized numerous times, not just by partisan people in the House of Commons, but by independent thinking academics, columnists, critics, whatever, for not being particularly interested in the niceties of democracy. Let's just put it that way. Do the results of last night's election suggest that parliamentary crime pays?
Well, I don't even know if I could dignify that with an answer in all honesty.
Just humor me, okay?
The electorate spoke, and the electorate are always right. And they felt that, listen, this contempt of Parliament, well, if you are a purist, a parliamentary purist, you may think that, well, that sounds bad. Anytime someone raises the word
doesn't sound good.
In contempt, if you're in contempt of the law, if you're in contempt of court, certainly they're punishable. That's a punishable crime. In this particular case, it was the opposition that were looking for a reason to bring down the government.
Well, first of all, it was the Speaker who made the decision. Second of all, how about proroguing 3 times?
The vote was done by Parliament.
How about proroguing 3 times in order to avoid the hangman's noose?
Proroguing is a parliamentary procedure which has been done in the past and will be done in the future.
How about demonizing a perfectly legitimate form of government, namely coalitions which seem to be in favor in every other Commonwealth country, but apparently are illegal, illegitimate, immoral here?
And I will challenge you to come up with a handful of those parliamentary democracies that are in a coalition that are doing very well and that are coming out of the worldwide recession the way Canada is coming out of the worldwide recession.
Okay, Ellie.
Look, I feel pretty strongly about this, so maybe I shouldn't feel so strongly about it. But remember, this is a man who came out of a Western tradition with the Reform Party. He ran against Ottawa and ran against its institutions and ran against the central institutions of central Canada. He said that the judiciary is stacked with Liberals. He said the senior civil service is stacked with Liberals. He took an adversarial view to Ottawa in the way that Ronald Reagan took an adversarial view to Washington. I think he does not have a sense of the importance of those traditions and those institutions. He doesn't believe in them in the way that other people do. And I think he sees this as a political struggle in which you take advantage where you can. And I don't know if I would go as far as Peter Russell, but I think the Prime Minister showed very frightening tendencies about the checks and balances that exist in our institutions to prevent the abuse of power.
Alan.
Yeah, I had a conversation with my favorite constitutional law professor for a couple of hours over last weekend, and it took us a grand total of about a minute, and you know what a kind of conversations I like to create, but it took us about a minute to get into very, very serious trouble. Let's say there was a minority. The counterfactual history is Stephen Harper says there's no reason to meet with Parliament. Farmers are sowing their crops and the country is proceeding as normal. We're going to meet in the fall. You meet in the fall for 2 weeks. You have a very perfunctory throne speech. You pass a few bills. You say, we don't need a budget. We'll do it in early the next year. How do the opposition parties put forward a money bill that is deemed a confidence vote? How do they convince the Governor General that it is same? Does the Governor General then bring out the foot guards and cause the opposition parties to sit to the right hand of the Speaker? How do you make the Chief Electoral Officer hold an election? Stephen Harper holds a news conference in Calgary saying this is all nonsensical, esoteric parliamentary procedure that Canadians don't care about, and I have 3 opinions saying that this is nonsense. That's how easy it is for our system that is based on fragility and tradition and civility and history to fall apart.
And he in the election campaign refused to say whether he would advise the Governor General to turn to the second place party in the case of a non-confidence vote, implying that he would try to force the Governor General to call an election.
You know what? I've got to push back a little bit on that one there, because he just wouldn't entertain. It was a hypothetical, and he said, I'm not dealing with hypotheticals. I don't think it was that he wouldn't, I don't know what was in his head, but
now, I'm not
he certainly played it that way.
Make no mistake, I'm not accusing Stephen Harper of having any such thing in his mind, but I'm saying that the political advisors around a politician could easily say, look, come on, let's stall things through the summer and so on and so forth. Very dangerous stuff.
Peter Russell may be concerned about the niceties of parliamentary procedure. I don't think there's more than a couple hundred people across the country that care about it at his level. I think the Liberals made a big mistake about trying to make this the issue, about how the government fell, about the democratic principles. I mean, I think they're right, and I think Harper was in contempt of Parliament, and he was in contempt generally of the democratic process. I just don't think that was a way to go in the campaign, because they weren't connecting with me. It's important, but it's just not a vote winner. It's just you have to talk to people about what they care about.
Is it all about vote winning?
In an election, it is.
Oh, geez.
Ely, you remember that 52% of Americans had never heard of the word Watergate by Election Day 1972, despite the Democrats using all their airtime and all their resources to try to get people's attention on that. I mean, the public reserves the right in a democracy to be ill-informed, or, as Bob says, maybe not care about this issue. Doesn't make it unimportant.
The NDP message was about what people care about. That's why they went up.
It's not about being ill-informed. It's not about ill-informed. It's about the Prime Minister of the country actually willfully disinforming people about what the rules are in the event of a minority parliament. And that's what happened. And my question is, obviously his supporters think that that's just playing the game hard, and you win, you win. Other people seem to think that that's a bit of subverting democracy. I don't know, you want to have
well, I just think that sometimes, and again, I'm the only person working media here at the moment, so I'll take the responsibility. I'll own up to this one. I think in some ways we didn't maybe do the best job of covering it. It's true that the Liberals tried to make contempt a huge issue. How often did you see us mention it, except sort of offhand towards the 9th graph, where we'd say, oh, and then he went into his contempt spiel again and blah, 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 and look over there at something else. I mean, I think we worry so much, it almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, because we worry that it's such a parliamentary or procedural technicality, no one out there cares about it. So, gosh, we better not write about it or talk about it, because then we'll just drive away readers, and we don't need that because we need those eyeballs. I think that maybe fuels the perception among some members of the public that, okay, it's clearly not a big deal, because if it was a really big deal, then the newspapers would be all full of it, and there'd be giant, big headlines, and there would be very scary music playing every time, the theme music on the nightly news.
Okay.
I do think it becomes a cycle.
With time running out here, let me try and put a couple of more things on the table. The Conservative base, Bernie, I suspect has been fairly patient with the Prime Minister over the past 5 years because he has been in a minority parliament and they know that he can't do whatever he wants. Well, guess what? Now he can. And I wonder whether the expectations of the truly small C Conservative base are going to be a little bit more. I think their expectations are going to be higher now. What do you think?
Well, I think that there's an expectation that they're going to have a strong cabinet and they're going to put
No, I don't mean
forward
that. I mean that the agenda is going to be more resolutely small C Conservative. You know I mean that. What are you messing around with me for?
I'm just saying that there's going to be a strong cabinet, and each cabinet minister is going to be responsible for their particular portfolio. And from those portfolios, there's going to be a number of things which the Prime Minister has spoken about during the course of the campaign, which is going to be implemented. Plus, we heard Sheila Kopp say yesterday, in 10 years, the Liberals haven't had a policy convention. Well, the Conservatives have had 2, and next month there's going to be another one. I mean, this is continually keeping touch with the grassroots and getting their thoughts and their ideas. But of course, as the Prime Minister said, he's going to be running on behalf of, running the country on behalf of all Canadians.
That's the long version of yes, by the way.
That the
They're
country
being
will
very
be moved.
disappointed. I'm actually so curious to find out now what happens for that very reason at that convention that's coming up. Because, yeah, you do have small C Conservatives who, every now and again, a couple of those resolutions usually make it onto the floor about one of the issues that the government has been loath to take any action on. And as far as I can tell, even a majority Conservative government has absolutely no desire to, for instance, reopen the same-sex marriage debate or reopen the abortion debate.
Or capital punishment.
Or
maybe.
capital punishment. I mean, I believe the Prime Minister entirely when he says it, and I think the majority of even his new caucus, I can't say for sure because I don't actually know who all of them are, but I suspect the majority of his new caucus feels exactly the same way.
Right.
That doesn't mean, however, that at the convention you aren't going to have a good-sized contingent of people that are demanding action on those sorts of things. And they get a little bit annoyed, and they were willing to take the whole, okay, we're only in a minority situation, so we can't do all that stuff for a certain amount of time. But yeah, I think it's a really good question.
Which means, do you think that the Conservative base, which now sees itself having 100% of the power, not just however much it was before in a minority parliament, will want some more ambitious targets, for example, on deficit reduction or on tax cuts?
Yeah, surely that's the point. There's social conservatism, which I think it's going to be very hard for him to satisfy. But there's conservatism in a whole variety of other areas. I mean, I think the first bill going through is going to be the Law and Order Omnibus Bill, right? That they'll get done before summer. I think that there are hot-button issues and demonstration issues that he will put in the window. I think he'll reduce the size of the federal government, which is the #1 demand of most fiscal conservatives. What does it mean? Fewer people,
fewer civil servants,
less programs, and probably less spending. He's got 4 years. This is a little like the Paul Martin opportunity. He's got 4 years. In the first year or two, he can take a savage whack, and he can reduce the size of government and satisfy his base and satisfy, frankly, his own economic thesis. And then he's got 2-3 years to recover from it.
Okay.
That's how he's going to satisfy.
How much time did you say I got left? 5 minutes. Okay, I want to make sure we get more ground covered here. NDP, Bob, you first on this one. Jack Layton has got a huge caucus, and not only does he have a huge caucus, he has a majority of his members from the province of Quebec. Most of whom I'm going to guess he's never met. Most of whom you say he's met them all. I bet if he walked into a room, he wouldn't have a clue who half of them were.
Can you name them all? It's a different thing.
Exactly.
He has met them all.
How much does
you
this
don't run
change?
for the NDP if you don't meet the leader.
How much does this change the kind of party the NDP is, given that it is mostly a party of Quebec MPs now?
It does change it. I mean, they'll have to really figure out the issues in Quebec. They'll have to become, I mean, they do run their caucus, of course, bilingually, but they'll have to be more serious about that. In terms of staffing and everything else, they'll have to run as a national organization. So there's some work to do about that. And whenever you bring in a new influx of politicians and their staff, there's lots of work to do. I'm sure they're up to the task. In fact, the way the NDP has run as it's increased its support over the last 4 elections is get some new MPs, get them trained up, get them to dig in and do a good job in their riding so they can hold their riding. We've been very successful at that. Almost every newly elected person under Jack Layton has been re-elected, and we'll just try to replicate that model in Quebec. It's a lot of work because there's a lot of them, but that's the task in hand.
Alan, how does it change the dynamic of the NDP to be a majority French-speaking caucus right now?
Well, Katie asked the question 40 minutes ago, how does Jack Layton position himself as a future prime minister? The #1 thing is don't implode. I mean, he's going to have a raucous, fracas
Raucous
caucus,
caucus.
if that second thing is a word. I mean, in the Diefenbaker years, they were packing heat and beating each other up and threatening each other, and I mean, there could be something as raucous as that. He's got to maintain unity, which Lipset, the aforementioned Lipset, said is really tough between urban and rural progressives. Then he's got to demonstrate that air of prime ministerial quality. And I would also like to say that maybe he won't be here 5 years from now. I mean, he'll be a 65-year-old man.
He will be then.
That is supposedly appealing to youth, you know, with the quintessential elderly person's hip replacement. I mean, maybe, and with cancer, I mean, maybe it'll be a leadership convention in a couple of years.
Substantively, he's got a problem. He said a lot of things in Quebec to attract votes that are anathema to Western NDP members.
Like what?
He has set the expectations pretty high. He has said, for instance, that provincial language law should superintend in the federal workplace. He's promised to open the Constitution. Now, he's not going to be prime minister, but he's created the most nationalist policies any English Canadian party has ever adopted in Quebec. His Western base, I'm sure, has some questions about that.
Katie, I want to know whether reporters like you are going to be scouring through the CVs and backgrounds of the 60-plus New Democrat MPs.
Yeah.
I mean, we've already heard some of the funny stories come out about one of them was in Vegas for the whole time, and you know, she's unilingual Anglophone, represents a unilingual Francophone riding. Her job is, she works in a bar at Carleton University. And now she's going to be representing a riding. Never mind, she doesn't live in the riding. She doesn't live in the province. I mean, this is a new way of representation.
Yes, I think it's safe to say.
You think she'll move?
I think it's safe to say the Googling has already begun, and that all of we're sort of looking up to try to figure out who these folks are. Which, by the way, is the case with all the parties. I mean, the parties that elected new members of parliament, not the ones who didn't. So, new Conservative MPs as well. But yeah, I mean, but that's standard actually. When that happened, when the Conservatives first, again, when they were the Reform Party and they first sort of came in great numbers to Ottawa. In that case, there was, you know, there were some who perhaps hadn't expected to be elected. Same was actually true for the NDP after Alexa McDonough became the leader, and they suddenly had that Halifax because she was in Halifax, and they had Atlantic Canada. They were suddenly electing MPs in Atlantic Canada that had never even happened before. I mean, Peter Stauffer was, I believe, you know, he worked for Air Canada. He was like a ticket guy at Air Canada when he was elected, and everyone sort of looked at him and thought, well, this isn't going to last long. And he's still there, and it will probably he could be a member of the Communist Party.
Well,
and run,
you know
and
what? Jack Layton pointed out at his news conference today that I think was it Bill Blakey was 22 years old, a university student when he got elected, ended up being the dean of the caucus and one of the great
He also
members.
has many sovereigntists as well.
Yeah.
Or sovereigntist-leaning members of
You just
parliament
don't know.
as well.
She's giving me the hook, guys. We got to go. Ken, I thank all of you for coming in tonight for this post-election post-mortem. Katie O'Malley from the CBC, and on that shot there, there's Katie, thank you. Then Ellie Alboim and Bernie Morton on that side of the table, and Bob Penner and Alan Bonner on the other side of the table. Great discussion, everybody. Thanks so much.